Y'all know what it is.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Eggs. Today's special guest is real estate investor and Airbnb coach, Jorge Contreras. Jorge is a real estate investor and Airbnb expert passionate about helping people create time, financial, and geographical freedom through investing. His track record of success is undeniable, having retired at 29, achieving millionaire status at 30, and now earning a seven-figure income from his vacation rental business. Jorge joins us today to talk about what it takes to get started with Airbnb arbitrage, how you can automate your vacation rental business, how to price your properties, and so much more. Please join us in welcoming to the show, Jorge Contreras. Jorge, welcome to the show.
Thanks for the opportunity. I appreciate you guys having me on here.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks for making time.
Love to have you. Yeah, so I guess let's just kind of start back at the beginning. I mean, obviously, your story is a pretty exciting one. I think a lot of folks are really interested in your topic, which is great. But I think we would like to maybe start at the beginning and get a little foundational understanding on your entrepreneurial journey. So do you mind sort of telling us how you started getting into doing business?
Yeah, absolutely. So it all starts, back in school from junior high school. I felt like I never fit in, right? They were always training us to become obedient, employees and taxpayers. And I just never fit the glove. And I always wanted to do my own thing. So I always felt out of place. And so I ended up dropping out of community college after 3 semesters, and I quit my job at the time at Bank of America. I was 20 years young, and I fell in love with this dance it's a sensual partner dance from the Dominican Republic called bachata. A lot of people that dance salsa dance bachata. Fell in love with the dance, started, practicing every day. Like 3 months later, I messaged a bunch of my friends on my BlackBerry phone. I say, hey guys, I'm going to start teaching at Yaneli's backyard, one of my friends. And that turned into me teaching at a dance studio, turned into me meeting my first dance partner. We started the first ever, bachata dance company. I started a nightclub. We started these dance festivals with 2,000 plus attendees where we would rent out the entire hotels on the LAX Strip. Next thing you know, I have 8 streams of income, traveled to 25 plus countries, teaching, performing from the time I'm 20 to 28. And I was doing multiple 6 figures doing that. But the problem is that I structured the business in a way where I was always trading time for money, and it was essentially my job. So like if I stopped working, if I stopped teaching dance, money would stop coming in. And I also never had any proper training, and we would do a lot of acrobatics. And what ended up happening is I got a herniated disc in my L5S1, ended up having back surgery in 2012. And the doctor said it was a 50-50 chance I'd ever walk again. So that was pretty crazy because I needed my body in order to make money. So that led me into thinking, how do I make passive income? How do I make money using my brain and not my body? And that's what led me into real estate investing.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I noticed the Rich Dad Poor Dad book on the shelf behind you. I'm pretty sure I know where you got your inspiration from.
Yeah.
When did you find that book?
So one of my dance students had a very successful business where she was doing over $500,000, doing Amazon stuff back in 2015 before it became popular. And 2 people had told me to read that book prior to her, but I didn't listen because they weren't successful. But when she told me, I was like, all right, I need to really read this book. So I read the book in 2015. Of course, it was life-changing. From there, I started getting all these ads about, investing and seminars. And so I saw an ad by Les Brown, and he was hosting a 5,000 person free event at the LA Convention Center. Went there. They were talking about Amazon, Forex, stocks, real estate, all kinds of stuff, everything under the sun. I ended up buying the $300 3-day workshop to this Rich Dad Poor Dad event. From there, of course, they had, different investments. I went with like the highest package, $35,000. And within 20 months, my net worth exceeded $1 million. And that's how that journey began.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. Well, yeah, no. So I just got back from the Dominican Republic, and I picked up cigars, rum, and Mama Juana, but I did not pick up bachata. So that's pretty cool that that you got into dance. I do a lot of business in Spain, so I've picked up salsa over the years. But it's interesting, or it seems to me that you're probably already kind of an outgoing guy, or like somebody that's already pretty charismatic if you're able to basically learn something like that and then grow it into something like this. Would you attribute sort of your success to sort of your outgoing personality also, or was it strictly the knowledge that you gained?
I would say a lot of it has to do with my personality. I'm definitely extrovert, risk taker, people person. My energy goes up when I'm around people. So that business just worked perfect with my personality. I was always teaching groups of people from 20 people to 500 people, teaching them at once, emceeing, performing on stage. So my personality was, perfect for that opportunity, dancing around the world. So I would say that has a lot to do with it. If I was an introvert, I think it would have been a lot more difficult.
Yeah. So now as you coach and you do things like that, I suspect that, a lot of people are looking for passive income when they start getting into Airbnb arbitrage and things like that. I imagine you also probably run into more introverted people. I mean, is this something that you work through in your practice, is trying to help people get beyond their introversion or get into sort of a more extrovert mindset?
Yeah, absolutely. When I did take, those classes in community college, a lot of the classes I was taking were like psychology. I was always fascinated with how people think and the different types of personalities. And I've gone really deep into that. So now I'm really good at recognizing when somebody is like an introvert or an extrovert or just different, whatever the personality. So when I notice that someone is very introverted, like my guess is always for the most part that they're not making as much money as they could be, because you look at all the different positions like in a company, and usually the people that do sales always make the most amount of money. And people who are really good at sales and love interacting, most of the time are extroverts. And so I always tell them that this is an opportunity to overcome, any limiting beliefs about having conversations with landlords or feeling like the world's over because they said no. And again, I always say the money's great, but what's more powerful is who you become in the process. So it's just an opportunity to sharpen those relationship skills, those enrollment skills that in the end is going to make them a lot more money over their lifetime. So
yeah, no, I think that's right. And I think that overcoming that, and my particular interest in this topic is, I think that there's so much that can be taught, but there's like clearly a divide between education and doing something, right? Like you can sit and read books all day, but if you never act on them, there's a problem. And for people who are introverted and maybe not as outgoing as you just seem to come by naturally, being able to put that education into practice can be a real challenge. And so I'm very interested in how people overcome that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, a lot of it has to do, we give them, of course, training, right? So we have content like on the online course, we have 6 coaching calls a week. And on 2 of the weekly calls, all we do is objection handling, role playing. We put the students into like breakout rooms and allow them to really break out of, their comfort zone. And on another call, we actually call landlords like every week. That's all we do. And they hear the coach. Students who want to step up to the plate and, give it a go will also call landlords. So it's really just by trial and error, just going out there and, failing forward and failing as fast as possible. And every no is just one step closer to a yes. So a lot of it is just mindset and letting them know that, again, it's not the end of the world. Eventually they're going to get that yes.
So run me through just based off of this. I didn't plan on asking this, but can you run us through one of those calls, one of those landlord calls? Because there's key objectives that you're trying to pull out of that conversation. You're probably trying to figure out how to get a good deal on the property, B, maybe get some owner financing built in. Is that kind of the route you're going for?
It's not so much owner financing. Most of our students, about 95%, are starting with a model called Airbnb arbitrage. So they are renting properties from the owners and with their permission and writing, then launching it as an Airbnb. So it's an arbitrage play, right? So if we're renting a property for say $3,000 a month, and if we're able to generate $6,000 a month after we pay cleaning fees, utilities, and rent, obviously the difference is our profit. So most people, when they want to get into Airbnb, 90% of people's goal is to replace their 9 to 5. They want to work for themselves. So this is like a new opportunity play, right? They want to go from 9 to 5 to building their own business. And most people need 2 to 4 Airbnbs to replace their 9 to 5. And most people don't have the money to go and buy 2 to 4 properties, especially with crazy interest rates and all that. And creative finance would be a great opportunity. I don't have any experience with that. So what we teach them is, the arbitrage model, just pay for the rent, the deposit, the furniture. We teach them how to leverage OPM, how to create partnerships, how to create credit cards. And that's more of the strategy. But yeah, the conversation typically, I call a landlord and I'll say, hey, hey, Ryan, I see your property here at 123 Main Street. I really like it. Is it still available? Once they say yes, I ask them if they work with corporate housing companies. And the reason we pitch it that way is anytime you mention the word Airbnb, they assume that you're just going to throw parties in their property, and that's not the case. And the reason there is so much regulation in cities is because of people that throw parties. So parties have really negatively impacted this whole industry and this economy of short-term rentals. So we don't allow parties, anything with music or anything where they want to bring in visitors outside of the people who are in the reservation. We don't allow any of that. And so we truly only work with professionals that are going to be there, just have a good time, respect the property, respect the neighbors, not create any issues. And so we pitch it in a way where the landlords understand what that is, and that's corporate housing. So we say that we work with corporate housing companies who are bringing their employees for training in the area, or they are coming to provide a service. And usually I'll ask them if they work with corporate housing. A lot of times they say, well, what is that? And then I got to explain what that is, and then just handle any objections that come through.
So you're trying to get a long-term lease at a favorable rate and then subsidize that lease with the Airbnb rentals and hopefully make a profit. Yeah. What are some things that you should consider before finding the right property? What makes it the right property as far as like city ordinances, location, price, ROI, all that fun stuff? Can you break that down for us?
For sure. Two main things that we want to look into. The very first thing is looking into the regulation. You don't want to launch in a city where you are not supposed to be launching. Maybe they're banned, and now you're going to start getting, fees every week or every reservation. So the first thing you want to do is call the building department in that city and ask them what the regulation is. Can I get a permit? How much does it cost? How long does it take? Once you get that green light, the next thing is to run the numbers on AirDNA, which is a data software that extracts the occupancy, the nightly rate, and it gives you a projected revenue over the next 12 months based on similar properties that have already been launched on Airbnb.
In similar locations as well, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
We look at bedrooms, bathrooms, square footage, amenities, location, and how many people you're hosting. They look at all that information. So someone out there has already taken the risk essentially. And if those properties are averaging, say, $80,000 a year, and you're going to pay $40,000 in rent per year, then it's a no-brainer. And that's the goal, is to generate $2 for every $1 that we pay in rent.
Okay.
So once you get the regulation, once you get the data, and then once you get the contract signed, those are the most important things.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think that sounds great. And it sounds like there's some risk mitigation built in, because that was going to be one of my questions was, first of all, the way that you see people pitch these things is sometimes, hey, you can get into this with no money down. So I think it's very insightful that you actually shared, that no money down means you're renting the place instead of, doing something shifty, because you hear about all kinds of financial models and kind of weird stuff that people are up to. And so, so I think that's an interesting insight, because maybe I'm just naive, but I hadn't thought of it as, doing it in that way. And so I think that's really interesting. Yeah. But I think, part of the risk, right, in getting into this long-term lease agreement or something would be, what if you can't fill the place? And so using the software, you say that it more or less mitigates the risk to some extent. But have you seen instances where it just flat out doesn't work and the people who got into it are tied into a place? Or would you say it works more often than not?
When people do their research correctly on the software, I haven't seen anybody lose money, but I have had a different situation, which is why I only launch now in cities moving forward that require a permit. So if it's a gray area, that's when they're not really issuing permits, but then they tell you you're not supposed to do it, but technically you can, because nothing is saying you can't. And so when I first started in 2017, everything was like a gray area because there was very little, almost no regulation. And so in 2019, I launched a sublease in Whittier, California. It's a super small city. And 6 months into the lease, they created an ordinance that overnight said no short-term rentals. Now, the good thing is we were paying fair market rent. And I always tell people, don't overpay for the property. You want to make sure you pay fair market rent, because what happened is we ended up leasing the property to a long-term tenant. We advertised it on Zillow, and the property was already furnished. It's a beautiful property, pool, huge backyard, built-in barbecue, craftsman home, 3-2 in a really nice area. Property at the time was probably worth maybe 800. It's probably worth over $1 million today. and we advertised it for 4,000. We had it under a lease agreement for 3,500. It's been, I guess, 3 years now. I am still subleasing that property to the same long-term tenant, still making $500 a month in profit, and it's from a long-term, tenant. And the only reason that worked is because I was paying fair market rent. So I always tell people, if for some reason something happens, maybe a market gets saturated and you're supposed to make money based on the data, but 1,000 Airbnbs launched over the next few months and now you're not making money, or if you launched in a gray area and the regulation change, you could always put a long-term tenant in there for the remainder of the lease, break even at worst, and then at the end of the lease, collect your deposit and go on to the next one.
Well, even if you don't necessarily break even if you lose $200-300 a month, that's better than just paying it. You get someone in there so you're not hemorrhaging, so that
Absolutely
makes sense. Can you do workarounds on, say, there's a location that I have long time been interested in. I do a lot of work in an area called Chelan, Washington, and they don't allow Airbnbs. Can you work with a property manager or property management company to kind of have a workaround for the Airbnb situation? Because they do have vacation property rentals in the area. It's a destination lakefront, and I think that's why they avoid the Airbnbs. Is there a model in there where you can work with property managers, or is that really not your thing? Have you ever done that before?
So is the question, like, if the city says no short-term rentals, is there any way around that? Is that the question?
Yeah. By working with the property manager.
Yeah, it wouldn't make a difference, if you self-manage or work with the property manager. Like, if the city says, hey, you're not allowed to do short-term rentals, which is under 30 days, then you basically can't do it. And there's a lot of people, for example, like in New York, who are operating, illegally, and who knows, maybe those fines are getting to them, or you hear these people that have a stack of fines, but they just never pay them, and then they get a court, and who knows what happens, right? But what you can do is midterm rentals, so like 30-day plus. So 22% of Airbnb's revenue last year in 2022 was from 30-day plus bookings, which is pretty awesome. It just means people are staying longer. So a lot of the companies who do relocation, like I have a family right now who just booked one of my properties for like 2 months, and they're paying about $6,000 a month, and I rent this property for $4,700. Normally we get like much higher bookings. It's like a very unique situation that's going on right now. But we have these relocation companies where families have some type of, damage in their home, and now they need to relocate them for maybe a couple months. And they will go through the Airbnb platform and book a property for 2, 3, 4 months, and they don't try to negotiate. They just pay whatever it is. We've also had corporate companies, like legitimate corporate companies, that are really coming to an area to provide a service or training. We've had nurses, and I've even had government bookings. I had this family last year who stayed at one of my units for 4 months. They came from Guatemala to the U.S. and seek a political asylum, and the government placed them in one of my Airbnbs, and they paid me $4,500 a month on this small unit that normally would have rented for $1,500 a month if it was a long-term rent tenant, and they stayed for 4 months. So a lot of these 30-day plus bookings, they come through the Airbnb platform. As long as you have the right properties and the right locations with the right amenities, you can get a lot of those 30-day bookings as well.
Interesting. Okay. So I have a friend that owns he kind of went a different route. He didn't go for the lease options, but he owns a couple different locations. And he's kind of gotten creative with it. He bought a piece of property with power and septic and all that stuff, and he put a bunch of like RVs in more of a camping type scenario. Do you mess around with that type of stuff, like the creative, like the yurts or the container homes and kind of stuff like that? Or are you mainly looking in the corporate world, just for ease?
Not myself. I have seen some people. There's a guy here. What is this place called? Like in Malibu, there's like a beautiful view, just super like high in the mountains, and you got a beautiful view. And he's got these 3 Airstreams. You guys are familiar with those, right?
Yeah.
And The Airstreams, you know, that they're nice inside, pretty basic, but outside he built sort of like a patio and like raised the foundation a little bit. There's a jacuzzi, made it look really nice. And those properties, or each of these 3 Airstreams, rent for about $1,000 a night. And you can tell the guy's making easily 20 to 30,000 a month on each of those things. And he's got 3 of them, and you could buy one for like 30 grand or 40 grand, like all decked out. So it's really interesting. I think it's something really creative, and a lot of people like having those unique experiences. I've never stayed at something like that myself, and I haven't, dabbed into any of that. Everything we do is like single family homes with pools. I have 2 units that are like 2-1, but everything else is like single family homes, 3 bedrooms, 2 bath or more. And they all have a pool, jacuzzi, and a game room. We want to be able to create that staycation experience, which, worked really well for us during the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And nowadays, since we're in a recession, a lot of people are traveling or just spending less and being more cautious on their budget. So maybe they're having less all-inclusive vacations, but having a staycation in the same or a nearby city can, give people a great experience, but at a fraction of the cost.
So with the lease option versus owning the property, there's obviously some benefits and some downsides. What are some benefits of doing the lease versus owning the property?
Yes, I always tell people, right, when you own the real estate, obviously you get all the cash flows, the monthly profit after all expenses. You got the appreciation, the increase in value over time, depreciation, which allows you to make some or all of your cash flow tax-free, someone else paying down your mortgage, and of course, all the tax benefits. When you're subleasing, it's strictly like a cash flow play, and you get some tax benefits because you're running a business, but you don't get any of the other benefits. So I always tell people the goal should be to own as much real estate, because that's where you're going to create long-term wealth. That said, I know a lot of you are not in a position to go and buy 2 to 4 properties to replace your 9 to 5. So let's start with subleasing. That can accelerate your cash flow, and then you can move on to purchasing. Typically, with the same amount of capital that you could buy one, you can sublease 5. And it's interesting because in some cities, I have properties that I own and that I also sublease. And my subleases sometimes make more in profit than the ones that I own. So for me, like if I sublease a property versus I buy it, my monthly profit doesn't change. It's very similar. So again, if you want to just go make it a cash flow play, subleasing is a play. When I wanted to replace my wife's 9 to 5, 6-figure law enforcement job in 2019, that's what I did. I launched 3 subleases, got her out of her job, and now she stays at home with the girls and everything. So
that's actually the rich dad quote is to get out of the rat race, and the rat race is your 9 to 5. And that's what the amount you need to be able to pay your bills and to get by. Once you can cover that with passive income and you have a little bit extra, that's getting out of the rat race. So that you no longer have to have that 9 to 5. You can just do what you want for the most part. It's interesting that you talk about it that way, as far as like I got her out of her job. And most people don't really think of it that way. So.
Yeah. So they say when the money you make in your sleep meets or exceeds your monthly living expenses, then you're out of the rat race. Just like I got the cash flow game up here, and that's what it is, right? It's like Monopoly.
I've played that a few times.
More realistic too. What's that?
I've played that a few times. Yeah,
it's more realistic to like the real world, because you start off by being stuck in the rat race. The most exciting thing is that you collect your paycheck, and then you start buying some rentals, and eventually it's like, hey, you're out of the rat race, and now you're buying businesses and apartment buildings, and everything multiplies by 100, and you're playing this much bigger game, which is very true.
Will you talk to us a little bit about sort of the day-to-day operation of this thing, right? I mean, I think, it's possible probably to outsource or automate everything, and maybe we can get into that. But it does seem like there is a certain degree of maintenance or ongoing work that comes with owning these kinds of properties. So can you talk to us a little bit about that? And then also just sort of if it's a sublease and somebody does damage to the property, who's liable for that kind of thing?
For sure. Yeah, it's definitely a high operation, intense business. There's always going to be you always need somebody to clean. That's going to be the person you need the most. And then from time to time, there's going to be maintenance. And then you need someone to do all the communications before, during, and after with each guest. The communications, of course, are all virtual. and the cleaning and maintenance, they're always in person. So I always tell people, use Thumbtack, Yelp, or what's the other one?
Maybe
Forget
Angie's
the name,
List or
but
something like that.
all these different ways where you could hire people and you could look at their reviews. And at the end of the day, when you hire someone, you're basically dating them to determine if it's somebody you're going to stick with. So I always hire somebody on a 45-day probation period, and within that period, if I'm unhappy with something or if they're unhappy, we each can say, all right, this isn't working. But after 45 days, we kind of make it a permanent thing. And so those are the three operations of the business. You could hire an experienced property manager or co-host on Upwork.com. You get VAs in South America, Central America, Mexico that are in a similar time zone to us here in the US, and they could literally handle all the communication. I usually create a WhatsApp group or a Slack with myself if I have a partner on that deal, the cleaner, the maintenance, the VA who does the communications, and then they kind of all communicate with each other. And I kind of step away and I become more of the manager, and then just hire the 3 technicians, right? Then eventually, once you have like 5 or more properties, you can bring in a property manager. And obviously that would allow you to work more on the business and not in the business. So I always tell my students, rather than doing the work yourself, delegate those 3, responsibilities from the get-go, so you can go and find the next deal, because that's the only way you're going to be able to grow. And then as far as the repairs, one of the things that gives the landlords confidence to allow you to do short-term rentals is to put it in writing that anything that is caused by my guest, I'm going to be responsible for. Anything that has to do with just natural wear and tear of the property that has nothing to do with our guest, the landlord's going to be responsible for. And just like when you check into a hotel, right? Ryan and Michael, they take your credit card, and if you create any type of damage, they'll charge your credit card for any incidentals. So we have access to their credit card on Airbnb up until 14 days after they check out. But ideally, you want to submit a claim before the next guest checks in, just so it's very clear as to, who created it, type of repairs or damage. And Airbnb is pretty good about that stuff. I think in 6 years of hosting, I probably didn't get paid out like twice because I didn't have maybe sufficient proof or didn't submit the claim properly, but they're like pretty good about that stuff. I've even seen them come out of pocket a few times when they couldn't collect on behalf of the guests. So that's what that, $1 million host guarantee policy they have is for.
Okay.
I actually, the friend that sets up the RVs on a campground kind of thing had one of his RVs destroyed, and Airbnb actually covered it for him. So
yeah, that's awesome.
It does work.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also wanted to ask, just like as it pertains to choosing properties, I mean, it sounds like you have a lot of properties that are sort of in your region, but I mean, are all your properties where you live, or can this sort of methodology be done, nationwide? Like, could you pick a market that you don't live in, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. Like all my properties are here in California. We have 8 that we own, 7 that we sublease, and 3 that we manage. But a great example is about 3.5 years ago, I launched a property in San Diego, and San Diego is like 2 hours from where I live. And I did not want to be making a drive back and forth. So I contacted my mortgage lender. I said, hey, do you have any contacts in San Diego? He said, yes, I do. He connected me with a real estate agent who was also an Airbnb property manager and also had his own Airbnb. So he was already very familiar with real estate, with the business, the locations that do better. So I arranged to pay him $3,500. He helped me find a property, connected me with the landlord. He would go to the properties and send me videos. We would do WhatsApp FaceTime walkthroughs, and that's how we approved the property. Then connected me with the landlord. I pitched to the landlord, signed the lease, and then when my team ordered all the furniture and everything from Amazon, he went in there like 3 times a day for 4 consecutive days, put all the boxes inside. He was there when we did the photography, when I sent the team to go and assemble the furniture, to do the decor. Like, he was there kind of, overseeing the whole project. And then I paid him half up front and half after the second guest checked out. So he basically helped me throughout the whole launching process. And the interesting part is, it's been 3.5 years, and I still to this day have never, ever seen that property, like ever. So I teach that strategy to my students on how they can do the exact same thing out of state, out of the country. Because it was 2 hours away, but I've never been there. It could have been in Texas and it would have been made no difference. So we do teach them how to launch out of state. Some of these students live in these areas where, the population is like 20,000 people and there's not a lot of tourism. So we teach them how to go in, other locations where there's more population and more opportunity.
Would you recommend anyone like seasonal rentals, like you rent an area on a ski lift or by a lake or by the ocean, and it's only good as far as like weather-wise half the year? Are those markets you should avoid, or does the seasonal income make up for it?
So yeah, two points on that, right? One of my buddies, Ryan Pineda, he has like 10 Airbnbs in an area like that called Big Bear, California. And their high season is from November through May. And then from May through November, it's not that busy, but he makes so much money during the peak season that he could be completely vacant during the rest of the year and still end up with like double, triple his mortgage payment. And at the end of the day, right, that's why I like this software, AirDNA, because it's going to give you a projected revenue for 1 year. So if it says you make, let's do some easy numbers. If it's at 120,000 for the year, you might have some crappy months where you only make 5K, but maybe on your peak months it's 20, but at the end of the year, you still made 120. So I always look at just the total year. At the end of the day, that's what's going to matter and tell you if it makes sense with the ups and downs of the seasons.
Sure thing. Let's talk about furnishings. When you get these places, I'm sure all of them don't have what you need in it. Do you buy initial stuff, or do you specifically look for furnished places?
Yeah, it's very rare. Like I personally have never launched a property that was furnished. I think I've had a couple students that have landed some, but even then, sometimes the furniture is not the best. You still gotta, throw out some stuff and deck it out, make it look nicer, bring in some nice colors, and definitely do some decor. So for me, we always buy the furniture, and typically we'll use we teach our students like how to use a cash advance, right, where you could transfer money from a credit card into your checking account. Typically with those promotions, you get 0% interest for up to 21 months. You do have to pay like 1% towards the principal every month to keep the 0%, but then they take the profits from the Airbnbs to then pay off the credit card. And usually in about 8 to 12 months, depending on the type of property and the profit, they already repaid the credit card, and now they still have that asset generating a couple thousand a month. But the crazy thing is they never had to use any other money. So a lot of times that's just like a paradigm shift, because you leveraged the bank's money. And so many of us grow up with the Dave Ramsey mentality of don't use credit cards, don't use OPM. If you can't pay for it twice, cash, you can't afford it. So which is truly how, a lot of what Rich Dad teaches is using leverage and assets and liabilities and stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned OPM. It makes me think of John Edney.
It makes you think of what?
There's a band out of California.
We have
really?
A mutual friend. They were called OPM for a million years, but they're right there in California too. He actually
Cool.
has a place in, what's it called? Tarantula Hill Brewery. Just give him a little shout out. So, but anyway, but yeah, no. So I think one of the things that, and I've been thinking about this, we started to tip into it a little bit at the beginning, but you've sort of explained, the process and some of the way that the coaching works and the sort of the tools that you put in place for risk aversion. But I wonder, like, it seems to me that, this, just like a lot of things that people get into, is something that might be hard for people to take that first step, right? There's some trepidation, they worry about the maintenance, or they worry about the, financial risk if something were to happen, or they worry about XYZ, right? What are your biggest sort of like, I guess, pushback from people who go through your course, and maybe you don't see it in your course at all, but maybe people who don't sign up, for example, what sorts of, pushback are you getting from people on this model? Like, what are the negative connotations that people are sort of, trying to poke holes in your story?
Sure. Well, sometimes people will come to a phone call with my sales team and they'll say, hey, what's the guarantee that this is going to work? And excuse me, I got to sneeze. Okay, went away. And they'll be like, so what's the guarantee? And we'll say, well, the guarantee is that if you don't do this, you'll be stuck at the same cubicle for the next 20, 30 years. Like, that's the guarantee. Or a lot of people will say, like, dude, I'm working 60 hours a week. I hardly see my wife and my kids. And I'm like, that's why you need to do this, right? Like if nothing changes, nothing changes. And how else are you going to get your time and your life back? And that's our ideal avatar, ideal client, right? Is like 9-to-5ers who are overworked, underpaid, or they have a high income, but they have no time. And I tell them, like, the only way you can get your time and your life back is if you build a business, because the other model of a 9-to-5 is you're trading hours for dollars. And if you want to make more money, you either need to get an increase or get a second job or work more hours, which means less time with family, less time with travel. So typically the exact reason as to why they won't get started is the exact reason why they should get started. So if finances are tight, I'm like, okay, well, how long have you been living this way where money is never enough and you have to, like, I don't know, eat noodles and rice and not eat out with your family?
Noodles and rice, man.
Hey, I like noodles and rice too. But it changes it. Like if that's what you have to eat every day, eventually you'll kind of, not like it or whatever. So we always tell them, like, look, if money is an issue, then this is the reason you should do it, so that you can create a life of financial abundance. If time is an issue, what are you going to do to get your time and your life back? So that's always like a pushback. Like, you obviously raise your hand. You came to this phone call that you booked. You filled out an application because you're going through some challenges in your personal life or your financial life, and you want to create change. And if nothing changes, nothing changes. So that's one of the ways. Those are a couple, like, the pushbacks. Or a lot of people will say, well, I've never done this, I have no experience. I'm like, hey, nobody was born with any experience. Like, I wasn't born with real estate. Like, I had no experience at all at one point. I also got my first property at one point. So I always tell them, like, hey, focus on progress, not perfection. Do what you can with what you have, where you are, and just build from there.
Yeah.
Tell us about your first property. Oh,
yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, that's
Go
okay.
ahead,
That's a good topic. I'll come back to mine.
okay. What was your first property? How did that go? What did you learn from it?
So one of my dance students, another dance student, told me about Airbnb in 2016 and how she was making 3 times more on Airbnb than she was making with her long-term rentals on a duplex that she had in Fresno, California. And I was like, that sounds crazy. Like, what do you mean 3 times? And she's like, yeah, I started explaining how this all works. And that was at the end of 2016. And at the beginning of 2017, I had 4 leases that were ending on 4 of my current properties that I already owned. At the time, those units were generating about $1,500 a month. All 4 of them were 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom units. So I already owned these properties. These are properties that I purchased after I joined, the Rich Dad program, and it taught me how to do a refinance, cash out, leverage equity, go and buy more properties, and turn those single family houses into multiple units through house hacking. So then I put those first 4 units on Airbnb in March of 2017, and they each went from making about $1,500 a month to making about $3,500 a month. So that took me from $6K in rental income to $14K in rental income. And I was surprised. I was like, wow, this really works. And these are properties that didn't have pools, jacuzzis, game rooms. They were like in okay areas. And that just opened my eyes. I'm like, man, what would happen if I launched in a really nice area with awesome amenities? But that's how it started. And that's how I was able to leave my dance business. That was me getting out of my rat race. Even though it was a business, I was self-employed essentially. And if I didn't work, I didn't make money, just like a 9-to-5. So that's how I got out of the rat race, in 2017, and became financially free, because that money I made in my sleep paid for all of my monthly living expenses.
Yeah. What I wanted to ask you before was, as it pertains to, again, just, objections that people might give you. It seems like, especially people who are maybe tight, have a tight budget and maybe not a lot of extra money, but they're looking for a way out, might really lean into the financial aspects of this. And so one of the things I wanted to ask you about was, like, first of all, leveraging different systems of paying for things. And we've talked to some degree about that. But is there any risk of becoming over leveraged? And how do we avoid sort of things like that? Like, are there stop gaps or things in place that might keep us from doing that? Or is that not really a risk for you guys?
No, it is definitely. Like right now, properties are in secondary and tertiary markets, especially those in like tertiary markets, for example, like Joshua Tree, Yucca Valley. These are like desert areas here in California. Those areas are struggling, and a lot of properties are like losing money today. So if you were over leveraged and had launched a lot of properties in those types of locations, like you definitely would be in trouble today, because those areas are not performing as well. Cities, for example, like Los Angeles, San Diego, Miami, Austin, Texas, Dallas, if you're in the right area within those cities that are primary cities, like you're still making 2, 3, 4K a month in profit, depending on the property. But definitely, I do believe there is such a thing as being over leveraged. That could also look like, you got 10 subleases and you got $10,000 in the bank, and you're like 1 month away from going, broke and going negative, for sure. So I always tell students, you want to have 3 to 6 months of rent, so you have some cushion in case you're in a slow season in your area. So for sure, that is a way that you could be over leveraged. And then what was the first part of your question?
Basically, I was just trying to lead into that. I was trying to understand the leveraging and if there was a way that people might.
I got you. Yeah. So another way, like one of our coaches, her name is Valerie. We have 4 different coaches. When she started the real system, she didn't have money to pay for coaching, and she didn't have money to launch an Airbnb. So she applied for a PayPal credit, and that gave her enough money to pay for the coaching. And we also teach another strategy. So you could buy property, you could sublease, and you can also start a co-hosting, AKA a management business. She went the co-hosting route and has 15 Airbnbs right now that are all co-hosting. And so the way that works is, imagine, Ryan has an Airbnb that makes 10 grand a month, and I'm co-hosting for Ryan. I make 15% gross revenue because I manage the operations. I create a hands-off experience for Ryan. I oversee the cleaning, the maintenance, communication. Like, I handle the entire operation and make this passive for Ryan, so Ryan can focus on, other things like the X podcast or other, ventures he has. So now I'm making $1,500 a month for managing his Airbnb, right? If I get 5 of those, I mean, you could just do the numbers. But the positive side of co-hosting is you don't have to put any money into the deal because it's not your property. You're offering a service, and you could easily manage, the first 5, 6 Airbnbs using that strategy by yourself. And you get a piece of all the upside with 0 of the downside, because you make a piece of the revenue. If that money made 0 1 month, then you made 0, but you didn't lose any money and you didn't have any risk. So I always teach my students to diversify their portfolio and start with subleasing, then get into some co-hosting, then get into some purchasing, or sometimes subleasing, purchasing, and then co-hosting. And this way you always have some like guaranteed money with no downside.
I like the runway approach, making sure you have a few months in the bank.
For sure.
Just to, I've actually heard of people that will buy a new property and they'll take the equity and put it in savings account specific to that property for the first year, just so they have, 10, 15 grand just sitting there in case they need to replace the roof, they need to do something drastic. I think that's more appropriate when you own it versus leasing it, doing a sublease.
Yeah.
Can we talk software? Do you have specific software to manage this, or is it all built in through Airbnb? How do you keep track of like cleaning and calendars and all that stuff?
Sure.
What are your go-tos?
So the way we do it is we give a co-hosting access to the cleaner, and this way they can see the calendar and they can see when to clean, when not to clean. Because in the early years, I would make the mistake of, I would send them a screenshot every day. And one time I had somebody that checked that my cutoff was like, I think at the time, 10 p.m. when I was starting out. And somebody made a booking like at 9:30 p.m. and I didn't see it. I missed it. My VA sent them the check-in information as she's supposed to. They checked out the same day. And the new guest arrived for that day and the property was dirty. And I'm like, how did this happen? And I'm like, okay, how do I make sure this doesn't happen again? I'm like, I need to give them access. So I gave them co-hosting access. And now they can see the calendar. The only downside when you do that is that they can actually see how much you're charging per night. And at the time, we would usually charge $25 or $50 more per cleaning to help us cover for like replenishables. like shampoo, conditioner, body wash, toilet paper, whatever. And sometimes I have this one cleaner specifically that would say, hey, I see you're charging $250, but you're paying me $200. Can you pay me the $250? Right. So some of my students don't like doing that. I still keep it that way because I'm just like, it's just easy. But there's a software called Turnover BNB that gives them calendar access without showing them the numbers. And so my property manager is transitioning all the properties to that software. And now you can even hire, let's say your cleaners, they went on vacation for a week, and now you need a new cleaner. You can go on Turnover BNB and you can create a job posting, and different cleaners will bid on it who clean in those areas.
Nice.
So that's a really cool software to hire people that are experienced and who know how to already clean Airbnbs. There's another good software that we were using for a while. We're not using it right now. It's called Guesty. And if you want to host on multiple platforms, in addition to Airbnb, VRBO, Booking.com, HomeAway, and like 50 other short-term rental platforms that none of us here have heard of, you can sync the calendars. Except with Booking.com, you can't sync. You got to do that one manually. But you could sync with most of the calendars. You can create a lot of automation. So that one is pretty cool if you want to keep everything under one platform and host on a lot of different platforms. Right now, we're only hosting on Airbnb and VRBO, and you can sync those two calendars inside of Airbnb, and you don't need any third-party softwares.
Nice.
Cool.
One other one that I recommend.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
But one other one that I recommend for pricing automation is Beyond Pricing. They look at airlines, hotels, events, and Airbnbs in the area, and they will adjust your pricing based on supply and demand. They don't work in every city today, but it's a really good software to maximize your pricing based on supply and demand.
So you can see what kind of conferences are coming into town, and it'll adjust accordingly.
Yeah, it'll adjust accordingly. Like you'll set like your base price, which is the ideal number that you would like to get. Call it 300, and it'll ask you for your minimum, like what's the least you're willing to take. And so if it's a short notice, like today's Wednesday. So let's say that today and tomorrow are vacant, they'll bring it down to your lowest. Maybe it's 150 or 100 a night, whatever it is. And this way it just increases visibility and gets more bookings.
Yeah.
Cool.
I wanted to ask you about property management. So we talked about all the different, components that go into this thing, the cleaning, the maintenance, all these things. Can you just hire a property manager that will handle all that for you? Like, are the experienced Airbnb property managers already equipped for all that stuff?
Oh, yeah.
So
yeah.
Really, you could just bring the property to them and wash your hands of it?
Yeah. Yeah, you definitely can. The only challenge is a lot of property managers charge 25 to 35% of your gross revenue. And like we have like a 30% profit margin in our operation. So if I hired a manager for 30%, we would be doing this for free or just for appreciation on the ones that we own. So what I've always done and what I teach people is to build an in-house team. So I brought in somebody that I've known for many years. And for example, I pay them $400, like a flat fee per property, because it's already launched, it's already automated, I already have a team in place. Like it's almost like, hey, come into the existing operation that's already streamlined and just take over and push buttons. But they're not like launching it from the get-go or building the infrastructure, like it's already there. So I teach my students how to do that. And this way we could have management in-house, and it's way more, cost effective. It probably translates to like 5% of gross revenue rather than like 25 or 30 or 35. So that's what I would recommend.
Yeah, that makes sense. We're almost at that time. Do you want to tell people where they can reach out, how they can get in touch with you if they have questions and want to maybe take your classes?
Sure. Absolutely. They can reach out to me on Instagram. It's at the Jorge Contreras.
Great.
Cool.
And we'll make sure to include all those links and everything in the show notes as well. So thank you so much, Jorge. This has been super insightful, man. This is like, I don't know. It's funny because it never occurred to me. Like I've wanted to dabble with this stuff. And for me, it was always just that issue with, well, I don't really have the money to buy something, so it just gets kicked down the road, right? We never do it. So, that insight alone about, doing sort of subleasing and stuff like that is huge. So thank you so much for the time and for the information.
Yeah, thanks, Michael and Ryan. Appreciate the opportunity, and I look forward to sharing this with my audience as well.
Absolutely. And thanks so much to everybody who tunes into the show this week and every week. And see you guys next.